Hello chess friends, how's everyone doing? It's a very awesome day where I preciously indulged myself to share some fascinating chess tips with you. I'm gonna to share with you some traps with extremely high success rates that you can use in 10 most popular chess openings to win an opponent's queen. Let's kick it off with trap number 1. You're playing white and you start off with the move knight f3. Now, your opponent, take a name, like he is a Magnus fan. He normally in different openings usually either tries pawn e5 or pawn d5, but in this case, pawn e5 is not possible, cause you're gonna capture the pawn. The most common move that your opponents will usually play against you is the move pawn d5. Now you surprise your opponent once again by playing the move pawn e4, which seems like just a blunder, so why not capture this pawn, and that's what pretty much all of your opponents will do. Now you jump with your knight forward, knight g5. Aiming to get this pawn back, your opponent naturally develops a knight to also defend this pawn. You play pawn d3 to attack this pawn twice. Your opponent is happy to trade a pawn because that's an extra pawn, and now he doesn't have to care about it anymore. After this trade on d3, your opponent is fully happy, he's a pawn up. The only thing a little bit annoying is that your knight here on g5 is in close proximity to his position, and together with the bishop, it creates some unpleasant pressure against this pawn h7. Once again, the top move here for black is pawn h6. Your opponent expects your knight to go back, and your opponent will enjoy an extra pawn. Instead, here comes a boom. Knight takes f7, this explosive move wins the game on the spot, just within a couple of moves. And do you know a quote about life? Progress is still progress, no matter how slow. And this trap works even against high-rated opponents. Now, the knight is also forking the queen and the rook, forcing black to capture. We've got this discovered attack, rook g6, checks the king, but at the very same time, we are winning the queen on the next move, which again, gives you more than enough material advantage to win the game later on. An extremely popular and successful trap, you're welcome to use it. Alrighty, we're continuing our journey on fooling your opponent. This time you're playing black. Your opponent green dinosaur opens up with the most popular move, e4 pawn, e5 pawn, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and at this point, it's a good moment for you to start looking at the position seriously, pretending like you're actually thinking about your next move. After some thinking, you play the move knight d4, pretending like you just want to trade knights. But of course, your opponent will notice that this move loses this pawn on e5, and instead of trading knights, it looks a lot more advantageous for white to just win a pawn on e5, which also hits this pawn f7 twice, which looks super advantageous for white. Now, at this point, if you're playing the over-the-board game, it's time for you to start to shake your head and look confused. After some hard thinking, you play the move, kind of out of desperation, queen g5, desperately looking for some counter chances. But in reality, this is actually a well-known trap. Well known, but not for everybody of course. So, queen g5 actually puts white in a losing position right out of the gate because queen g5 double attacks this knight as well as the pawn on g2, and if your queen can enter there, that'll lead to a lot of troubles for white later on, but right now, white is already down the road, and they can't really go sideways too much. Anyway, they're going to at least lose this knight on e5, but of course, white will still maybe be optimistic at this point because knight takes f7 hits the queen, hits the rook, you know, wins a pawn, and then you capture this pawn on g2, threatening queen takes h1, and notice that it's actually nearly a checkmate because your knight also takes away this square from your opponent's king, and now you're completely winning. Alright. Just within a couple of moves, after the rook goes here to f1, let's say, now you play queen takes c4, check to the king, and at this point, your opponent may realize that he's doomed to lose because, well, Magnus actually has to give up the queen, play qe2 allowing you to capture the queen and to get the decisive material advantage, because if not, if Dinosaur doesn't play that move but instead plays bishop e2, that leads to a very funny checkmate, knight f3, a smaller checkmate, taking advantage of the pin. At this point, you may be wondering, hey Stockfish, but what if my opponent does not want to play d4? What if he plays another common move, d4? Well, we've got you covered. We're going to win opponent's queen no matter what he does. He's doomed to lose a queen against you. And let me share a quote with you: keep your mind on what you want to happen, not what you do not want to happen. So after d4, we're going to play e5, gambiting a pawn here. After that, we play bc5, just developing. Your opponent usually plays knight f3, that's the most common way for white, and now we play d6 again, just a normal move, pretending like you're developing. And here is an important note: if you're playing a blitz game, then it's important for you on the next move to play your move real quick, immediately, because your opponent should think that you pre-moved it in advance. He should think that you pre-moved this knight to jump on e7, expecting white to play some developing move. And your knight will come here to e7, but what dinosaur usually does here in reality is pawn takes d6, and as I said, you gotta quickly instantaneously play knight to e7, pretending like that was a pre-move, and then your opponent will easily think that, oh, he just pre-moved this silly move, I can win a knight, and they'll happily capture it, thinking that they're actually winning the game right now. But then here comes a boom, bishop takes f2, a strong counterblow which turns the table around. Now the king is forced to move, which deflects the king from the protection of the queen, so we grab the queen, the goal is achieved. The next trap is really evil. Even title players are falling for this trap because it's nearly impossible for your opponent to calculate all these variations if they aren't ready, if they aren't prepared. You start off with the move pawn e4, your opponent responds pawn d5, now you play pawn e4, we're sacrificing the pawn, your opponent captures it, you play knight c3, attacking the pawn, aiming to get it back, therefore, Magnus goes knight f6 to defend the pawn, and now we kind of acknowledge that we can't get our pawn back. And we just play f3, after your opponent captures it, you now recapture it with a queen, which is a nice move. By the way, it potentially prepares you to cancel queenside in some variations, but your opponent may notice that you keep playing dumb moves and you keep losing pawns because he can safely capture this pawn on d4, getting the second pawn for nothing. Then anyway, you play b3, at least you're developing a bishop with a tempo, and what's nice here is that although you sacrificed a couple of pawns, you're actually ahead in development and having quite significant compensation here. Your opponent here will think for some time, and one of the moves that they commonly play is the move queen b4, looks very advantageous. Not only black retreated, but they also counterattack this pawn on b2, which you know, from there it's going to attack the rook, attack the knight, and if you cancel queenside, then it looks like it loses to another move, bg4, which screws the queen and the rook. And looks like Magnus is just going to capture something with every move that they play, and you're going to lose all of the pieces that you have. But instead, here comes the refutation. It's the move which, as I said earlier, is extremely hard for him to foresee, so we can't really blame Magnus for not seeing it. It's the move knight b5, it's quite a high-level stuff, it's a sacrifice of the queen, and strangely enough, this move creates a threat of checkmating 1, knight takes c7, for that reason, he can't capture your queen because knight takes c7 is really a checkmate. Notice that your rook cuts black's king off, so that's really a checkmate. You are not going to become a beast overnight, grind every day until you become. Let's take this move back. And now what is Magnus fan going to do instead? It's not easy for black to defend this pawn because also notice that this knight on b5 is doing a good job interfering with black's queen so that he can't defend this pawn on b7 anymore. Therefore, besides knight takes c7, you've got the second powerful threat which is queen takes b7, and if you can execute that move, that's going to lead to a complete devastation for black because from there, your queen is going to attack the rook, then attack the knight, in some variations, maybe it will jump to c8. So that's going to win anyway, and for that reason, some of your opponents will decide to give up their queen. Here queen takes b5, and indeed, that prevents an immediate checkmate, but the goal was not to checkmate an opponent's king, but just to win a queen and to win a game later on, so the goal is achieved. Now you're getting a winning material advantage. If you don't want to play those special openings designed to trap your opponent, then you may, of course, continue with your usual move. And then if your opponent goes for the Sicilian defense, one of the main options of black, then you are going to go into the so-called Smith-Morra gambit. Here after c3 pawn captures, knight c3. You're sacrificing the pawn to get ahead in development and to have a long-term initiative. Here black usually responds symmetrically, knight c6, knight f3, and at this point, Magnus realizes that if they jump with their knight symmetrically, then they have to always worry about this move knight takes d5 attacking the knight. They usually don't want that, therefore, instead, they want to first play the move knight d6 to stop you from pushing this pawn forward and then safely play knight f6 without caring about any potential attacks from your side. You play developing move bishop c4, black now gladly plays knight f6, but then you still, nevertheless, play the move knight f5 and actually put black in big danger. It is very likely that your opponent is unfamiliar with the theory about this trap, and then they just go down within a couple of moves. Because your attack is extremely dangerous in all of those variations. And let me tell you a quote, even the greatest was once a beginner. Don't be afraid to take that first step, and let me give me an example. If Magnus captures with the knight, you happily recapture, pawn takes, but then you don't trade queens because that's not the goal, right? The goal is to win an opponent's queen, so we first capture over here. It's the same tactical motif that we have already seen in some of the previous traps, but in a new variation, in a new opening. After king takes, we are winning the queen, getting a winning game. If you are an advanced level player, then perhaps you're familiar with the previous trap in the Sicilian defense, but the next one will probably be something new, which is great because your opponents aren't familiar with it. Now there are two ways for you to get into it. It may occur against the Scandinavian defense if you start off with the move knight f4, your opponent responds to d5, and you play knight to c3 at this point, but there is also another way where you can force your opponent into this variation, into this position no matter what they play at first. Let's start again. At first, you start with the move knight to c3, an uncommon move, which is perfectly fine if you're developing a piece. And then the most popular response for black is a move pawn d5 because that grabs the center, maybe creates some d4 threat at some point. And then you play e4 pretending like you're just offering an exchange, and after a pawn takes it, you then don't take immediately, but you play bishop c4. Now your opponent thinks to himself, wait a second, I can now defend this pawn. Knight f6 defends the pawn and develops a knight, and now you play pawn d3 again pretending like you're just offering the trade. But we never wanted it, so pawn takes d3, and now you can keep playing in Gambit style knight to f3, just developing a piece, and since your opponent is used to your dumb play, that you're just losing material with your every move that you play, he may gladly capture one more pawn here on c2, but now instead of queen takes c2 or queen takes d8, you already know the trick, right? Be proud of who you are and not ashamed of how someone else sees you. It's the same shot bishop takes f7, which is in this case quite a surprising thing because you know this pawn was attacking you, but you ignore it and instead sacrifice your bishop over here with all the same motif queen takes d8, and you win. Now let's imagine you're playing black once again. Your opponent starts off with the move pawn d4, hoping for some sort of queen's gambit, but you instead, after pawn d5 and pawn c4, you surprise your opponent and you move your pawn not to e6, which is something that white expects, but to e5, your counterattack. Now Dinosaur will usually win this pawn, and now pawn to d4 creates some problems for white because at least they can't develop their knight normally. This square is taken away, and he feels uncomfortable about that because, yeah, they're a pawn up, but they can't develop their knight normally. In order to develop this bishop, they also have to move the pawn somehow, so they do play e3 here quite frequently, hoping just to trade off this annoying pawn, and after that, to finish their development comfortably and to enjoy an extra pawn. But now you play bishop before. As always, we're confusing your opponent and playing the moves which he does not expect. Now white covers bishop d2, again expecting you to trade bishops, but instead, you once again play the move which was not expected, pawn takes e3, and again, it's a really fun trap. It's quite an old one, so some of your opponents will definitely be aware of it. But many aren't because the following variations are quite tricky. Now your opponent notices that he can actually win a bishop for nothing, right? So they will, but now pawn takes f2, and at this point, your opponent starts thinking hard and he realizes that king takes f2 is actually not an option because that will lose the protection of the queen, and you will win it, so they play king e2, hoping to at least maintain the guard of the queen. Now you have a rare opportunity to under-promote in a real practical game. You take your promote to a knight, delivering this nasty check to the king. It's in the darkest moments that we find our greatest strengths. Therefore, Dinosaur captures it, but now here comes bg4, adding one more attack to all the white's vulnerable exposed pieces, and you ultimately win the queen on the next move. Now what if your opponent starts off with the move e4? Well, we already know that he's doomed to lose, right? No matter what he tries, he's going to lose a queen against you, so we start off with the move knight f5, we have already analyzed knight f3, let's analyze another common move, knight f4, which is one of the most aggressive chess openings for white, the king's gambit. Now we play knight e5, as always, we love to sacrifice a pawn in order to gain the initiative and to attack later. After knight takes d5, we are confusing your opponent once again. They expect you to play knight f4, which is the main line and leads to a ton of theory, but instead, you keep sacrificing a pawn to c6. Just now I realized that in all these traps, somehow we give up a few pawns to then later on gain an important queen, which is nice. Now white captures here, knight takes c6 at this point. It's already not that easy for white to figure out what to do because, you know, their king is a little bit exposed with this move nf4, in all the variations. They got to worry about this potential check on h4, so knight f3 is the most popular move for white to play. Now you play e4 to attack this knight, the knight jumps forward, at least they can somehow justify this pawn on f4, now at least it defends the knight, and you play the move bishop c5, which again, annoys white because it shows them that they aren't going to castle that easily. You do control this g1 square and therefore white's king can't castle anymore. Alright, let's play bishop e5, that's a pin that pretty much all of your opponents enjoy imposing against you, creating this pin, attacking the knight, attacking it twice, looks like you're going to defend it but you just ignore it. Stay calm and play knight f6, now your opponent thinks that you simply overlooked it, and actually, even if your opponent doesn't take it, you know, he's in a quite dangerous position anyway, but if white does take it here on c6, hoping that now this is a double attack and white is going to win the rook, you play bishop e7 and after white wins the rook, they're happy. Your positive action combined with positive thinking results in success. You say, hey, wait a second, you won a rook but I'm going to win a queen. And you play bishop g4, a sudden shocking move and it turns out that white's queen is trapped right there on its original square d1, quite a rare case and you win, because not only you win a queen but you also continue your attack against this exposed king. You can even play queen d4, queen f2 in some variations, you know, something like that, so you're completely winning here. The following trap is quite funny because it usually works against a little bit more advanced level opponents and it usually does not work against beginners, which is controversial. Let me show you why. After white goes pd4, this time we're playing knight f6, which is also a common move, and after green dinosaur goes knight c4, we are sacrificing the pawn on e5, now white captures it, you jump with your knight forward to e4, now he usually plays knight f3, that's the most common move and here you play the move bb6, pretending like you just want to fumetto your bishop here to b7, and at this point, if your opponent is a little bit more advanced, they usually notice that there is a critical flaw in this move bishop b6, he can jump with their queen forward, queen d5 with a double attack, but that's what we're waiting for actually. White thinks that he's about to win, but we've got something prepared against it, and that's why I said that it usually does not work against complete beginners because complete beginners simply do not notice this move queen d5, which we wanted them to notice. But they're simply not strong enough to figure out these tactics. Anyway, queen d5 is a very high level thing, I mean, the following trap is a very high level thing, even masters and grandmasters are trapped that way. Now we play bishop b7, giving up the bishop, and after queen takes d6, we play knight c6. Our idea here is to put this queen in the cage and to win it later on. Notice that there aren't many squares for the queen to go to, qa6 is basically the only available square, and if not, against almost any move of white, you're going to play knight c5 and from there, you can easily notice that they'll trap the opponent's queen completely, therefore, Dinosaur really has to be concerned about his position. And white usually tries to escape, so they play queen a6, trying to somehow escape. You play bishop b4 check, play this move with the tempo, and you put one more piece around, white's queen, which cuts off some more of the squares where the queen could possibly retreat. After bishop d2, we play our winning move North Carolina 5. Now the queen is attacked, the only square for the queen to go to is queen b5. And now you can win it by playing a6, but it's even stronger to trade the bishops first because otherwise, your pawn can at least get 2 minor pieces for the queen, so we trade here on d2 first, we then play a6, and it's another fun variation where your knights, with the support of one pawn trade, captured the queen, so this knight takes away these 2 squares, the other knight takes away those 2 squares, and ultimately, the queen is lost as always. Congratulations if you made it thus far. It is the final trap for today. It means that you have enough patience to become an intellectual chess player. After d4, one of the openings that is popular on the amateur level, in fact, even I recommend playing it, is move d5. Now against this Scandinavian defense, we're also going to use a little trick here. After knight c3, queen a5, we're entering the main line, and usually, dinosaur goes d4, and after that, again, there is a ton of theory, but instead, we avoid playing this move and we play knight f3, which is a little provocative move. Lots and lots of your opponents love putting this pin, bishop g4, they think that creates some uncomfortable situation for you, but now, you play h3, and actually, it turns out that this move bg4, although so common, turns out to be wrong and it gives you an advantage. Because now, if the bishop goes back, you can actually pressure it forward with the move4, and your bishop potentially can even be placed here on g2, so you have this advanced fianchetto and you just gain some extra tempo for your attack, and life is cool. Black is at a disadvantage. If your opponent notices that, he may decide to trade here on f3, now queen takes h6, notice that it also hits this pawn on b7, your opponent may wish to develop knight c6, maybe in some variations. They'll hop to castle and play knight d4 and hit your queen, hit this pawn on c2, something like that. They may fantasize about stuff like that, but of course, we aren't going to allow that. We play bishop b5, now we put the pin on this knight and we are threatening to capture it because we're attacking it twice. The only move for black to defend it is a slightly awkward move queen b6, but that's the only way. But now you shock your opponent once again with the winning shot nd5, we're attacking the queen, and if it captures the bishop, and by the way, it has to capture the bishop, if it tries to escape, just a little side note, if it tries to go here, we play bb4 and we force it into capturing our bishop anyway. Never let a moment go by where you don't recognize how blessed you are right now. So we have queen takes b5 and now knight takes c7, which is a fork to the king and the queen, and thus the goal achieved, we won an opponent's queen. That was our tactics, and if you have enjoyed a lot then do share with your friends, and wishing you all the best. Thanks for watching, bye bye.